So my name's Marshall McGuire. I've been a member of the Australian Music Centre for over 30 years, I think it's fair to say. The Australian Music Centre feels like it's always been there as part of my career. Now, I can't pinpoint the moment where I connected, but I was aware as a student that there was this body, the Australian Music Centre, that held this repository of Australian music. So it felt to me like the place to go when you wanted to know about Australian music. And when I moved to Sydney from Melbourne in the late 80s, it was kind of like a drop-in centre. It was like the centre of a community. You could always pop in and look at scores, you could listen to recordings, you could meet people, and there was always an incidental or accidental connection with someone who happened to be passing through town or had popped in to do something. So it became more than just a repository of music. It became a real centre of a community. I remember the offices in the Rocks very clearly. This beautiful heritage building overlooking Sydney Harbour. I mean, it was luxury, real luxury in the 90s and into the 2000s, and a big sort of communal area. We used to have lots of events there too. I was also the president of the New Music Network for a long time, very close relationship with the Australian Music Centre. So we'd often have events and talks and gatherings to just, as I say, bring everybody together. And that's probably my fondest memory of the space. You're always going to bump into someone and have really good conversations about the thing that we were most passionate about, which was Australian music. I remember it principally being a resource, a library of scores and books and so on. You could go in and physically get things off the shelves, or be brought things off the shelves out of the library and look at that. Obviously with technology that's changed over the years, so it's become more of a virtual library, but the information is still there, and in fact you could argue it's become more accessible to more people over those years because, you know, it's the eyes and ears of Australian music to the world, so the whole world now has access to the whole collection. I think it's expanded its breadth in terms of what we consider a composer now. Back in the days when I first joined, mostly it was physical manuscripts that people wrote, but of course there's sound art now, there's improvised music, there's all sorts of ways that composers are expressing themselves in contemporary Australia, and I guess the challenge for the Australian Music Centre is how to capture all this material, how to make it available for generations to come, so that in another 50 years, when students are going to the Australian Music Centre for the first time, they can look back on all this work, some of which may be quite ephemeral, but to get the full history of Australian art music creators in one place. And I guess that's a challenge going forward, but I think it's one that's being met right now at the absolute highest levels. Yeah, I think a lot of people may not realise that, you know, the AMC almost operates as a kind of a publishing house too. For a lot of composers who don't have representation by other publishers, this is the only place you can get their scores, and royalties flow to composers through the Australian Music Centre. And of course sales of scores, rental of scores is very, very important. You know, post-pandemic there's obviously been an interruption to the flow of the general commercial practice. But it's interesting how it's opened up new ways of engaging with it too. And we know lots of schools, educational institutions, big music organisations, the orchestras, opera companies, and then the small to medium sector, all engaging in different ways with sourcing their material. And then, of course, the benefits of that flows onto the composers. And I've always looked on this as an outsider because I'm not a composer, I'm a performer of music, so I need the Australian Music Centre, I need the composers to be there for my own practice. But I'm very mindful that every time I perform a work, it flows back to the composer, and the more I perform, the more it flows back. So there's this circular engagement that we have, performer, composer, publisher, Australian Music Centre, that is good for all of us. As a younger artist, I felt like it gave me some credibility. I felt proud for my colleagues. I felt honoured. The awards today still continue, and I think a lot of people have different views about awards. I think they're important for that moment, that they elevate us all, and I think it sometimes can illuminate the work of artists and musicians that may sometimes get a little bit overlooked, which I think can help spread the message, contribute to the discourse more broadly in Australia about the value of music and creators in our everyday life. I imagine a world, what if there wasn't an Australian Music Centre? Who would represent the tens of thousands of composers, arrangers, improvisers, creators, music creators broadly? Who would represent them on the national stage? Who would represent their interests? Who would publish their works? Who would disseminate their works? Who would advocate for their works? Who would award the awards? Who would provide the publicity? Who would spread that word? I think the Australian Music Centre, in that sense, I hope, has value to all the members and all our future members, to be there for them, to advocate for them. I think it's that advocacy, if one word, advocacy, to represent individually and collectively this extraordinary creative force that's going on in Australian life.